Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is your host Salah Al-Lathi, and I'm excited today to have with me Royce Holladay. Royce is a director at the Human Systems Dynamics Institute, HSDI. She's a teacher, facilitator, and writer. Royce, welcome.
Thank you. I am really pleased to be here, Salah.
Appreciate you being here. Just to give the background, I met you at the workshop that you've taught, and I was one of the participants. Create your narrative, change your story, or change your story, change your patterns. And I found it to be very insightful. And I thought, why don't we record something together and share what I learned? Before we get started and go down that path, say a little bit about yourself. What's your story? How did you end up doing the work that you're doing now? And who are you?
Yeah. Well, it definitely was not a straight line. So I grew up in Texas. I went to a small university in Canyon, Texas, and came out as a teacher. I was a public education teacher. I taught in English and science, mostly biology. And I started so long ago that I started teaching in junior high, which I don't even use that phrase anymore. They're now called middle schools, but that's how long ago it was. And I taught science and English there. Then I moved and spent 4 years teaching high school kids who struggled with traditional schooling. And we were an alternative setting in a mid-sized district. And I think probably that was 4 years of learning. It was amazing how much I learned in that time. I was not much older than most of the students, and I was green and had always wondered why schools worked the way they worked. And this was a place that didn't have to work that way. And so what I've realized in the years since is that I was, in that time, dealing with the complexity of helping teenagers move through school. And what I learned was about complexity, but I didn't know that's what I was learning. But I learned to be flexible. I learned to respond to where they were. I learned to move day at a time through the challenges of teaching there. Then I moved into school administration, became a district level person who helped teachers and principals. About that time, I moved to North Carolina and was in the Wake County public school system for 3 years, where I did strategic planning and worked on school reform kinds of things, supported schools as they did individual planning. Then I moved all the way across the country to Everett, Washington, and did lots of different things there. I worked in special education as a director. I supervised principals at one point. I did curriculum at one point. I was engaged in planning and development. And again, what I realized was that I was just working in complexity. I have realized, I didn't know it then, but I was working in a very complex state, helping people move through the changes and adaptations they needed to do to get used to the complexity and find their way. It was while I was in Everett that Glenda, who is my sister and coworker, was working on her doctorate and looking at what is it that makes the world be the way it is. She had been an entrepreneur and in a technology field in the 80s and early 90s. And in the 90s, when laptops came out and all the tech world changed, she realized that her company was not going to make it if she didn't do something different. And so she began to read about and realized that what she was reading in complexity in the earliest studies really represented what she was seeing in her company and what she was seeing in her clients. And so she began working on a doctorate using complexity as a field of study. And it was so much fun because in those years, we'd come up against something in a school district and I'd call Glenn and I'd say, so what are you working on right now that could help me with this? Or she'd call me and she'd say, I just learned the coolest thing. And she'd tell me what she was learning. I'd say, well, listen to this. This is how that played out in my life the other day, right? So I was learning so much from her at that time that when I decided to leave public education, I packed up and took my daughter, who was just graduating from high school, and we moved to New York City because I'd always wanted to live in New York City. Why not? And it was during the 2 years I was there that I worked with Glenda and we opened the HSD Institute. And when we launched in the New Year's of 2003. Then I moved here to Minneapolis soon after that, Minneapolis area, and I've been here ever since. And it was over the years since then of working with Glenda and doing lots of writing about complexity and teaching and consulting. I coach, but I'm not a formal coach. I'm not a certified coach, but I use these tools when people ask me for help. In fact, it's funny that we're doing the change narrative today, because just this week I had a coaching client whom I had worked with before who has now come to a point in her life. She says, I've got to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I want to work with you on this change stuff. And so it just started this week where I got back out in the narrative of change work and was looking at it. So it's an interesting intersection of time to be doing this podcast.
I learned about the work that you and Glenda do from fellow Agile coach Ahmed. And he speak highly of the Human Systems Dynamics Institute and both of you. And I experienced firsthand with you the Create Your Narrative workshop, as well as Glenda's adaptive action that I also participated in. But I think you're pointing to this idea of complexity, which is we're living in this world where there is a lot of complexity and it's hard to know where to start. It's really, things are very fluid, things are moving fast. And I think some coaches, especially depending on which domain they're in, maybe, they have their different set of tools. And with HSDI, there's another set of tools that we can learn and incorporate to be able to kind of deal with the complexity. So one of the things that you are teaching is this idea of creating your narrative. So what is a narrative? Like, how do you define this word narrative?
That's a good question. Narrative is a word that people use all the time. I'm going to narrate this story, or I'm going to tell a story, and as I started working with people around change and bringing HSD into that work, someone sent me an article about how journalists so often back away from the complexity in a story. So things get hard to talk about, or they move into a place that's more complex, more challenging, and they veer off from that. Now, this was 4 or 5 years ago. That's not so much anymore, but it was something that really triggered my thinking about how do we help people think and talk about change. And so I put together this information. So a narrative for me, it's a story that is basically an essential, simple description that can help inform the patterns that you want to move toward a life that's more adaptable. So we talk a lot about patterns in HSD, and a pattern is the essential ways that we live our lives out. So if you were to ask someone, what are the 3 words that describe who you are, or if I were new meeting you, what are the 3 words I would probably use to describe you? So Salah, if I were to ask you that, what would be your response? 3 words people would use to describe you.
I would say a writer, connector, organizer.
So that brings in my mind pictures, patterns. So it means that in your life you have a pattern where you get new ideas, you write them, you share them. You learn more, you write more, you share more, right? And so that's the pattern that people have seen about you and how they would describe you. You connect people. You put person A with person B and see where they go with that. And the fact that you do these things enough and often enough in your life that people see them as kind of the essence of who you are. So as I talk about narrative, what I'm talking about is how do you take the essence of who you want to become and where you're headed and use that to inform your day-to-day action. So a narrative is listing or naming those patterns and saying that's who I want to be. And then how do I live those patterns out on an ongoing basis as the world continues to change around? Does that make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I see this very much in coaching as well, like, starting like with knowing yourself, self-awareness. Who am I? Which I think that's one of the questions in creating your narrative. Who am I? As you mentioned, like what are some words that people might describe you with? And that can inform, okay, this is where I can flourish in this area, or maybe I need to shift my focus to something else if I want to change the identity or who I am or what I'm
Like,
known for.
I had a friend years ago who spent a ton of money, went halfway across the country and spent a week with this consultant who taught visualization.
Mm.
And her purpose was to learn to quit smoking. And so she spent this week, she spent the money, she flew home, and she had this plan. And after 6 weeks, sure enough, she had quit smoking. And in 3 months, she was smoking again. And when I asked her about that, she said, Royce, I realized that all of my visualization, all of the stories I told myself, all of the work was about quitting smoking. I never thought for a moment what it would be like to be a non smoker.
Mm.
And so the visualization of quitting was very powerful for her and became a narrative that moved her forward day to day to day toward quitting. But she didn't have that narrative she needed to
Mm.
stay quitted, to
Yeah.
be a non smoker in the world that was so complex, which is what she was trying to cope with the smoking. And so if you can help someone think about not the process of change, but what is it they're changing to? And what will those patterns look like? Then every day, every choice, every time you think about what I'm going to do next, you can say, okay, where am I today on that pattern or that set of patterns? And where am I going? And how will this particular decision move me toward that pattern? How will it keep me from getting to that pattern? And sometimes you go ahead and you choose the thing that's not going to move you toward the pattern today, but tomorrow you move back toward the pattern. So it's the same if you're working on a pattern where you want to be a better writer or you want to start a podcast. I enjoyed reading your introduction about what was it, 7 years ago, you decided you were going to do a podcast, bought the material, you read all about being a podcaster. And then it wasn't until you decided that pattern needed to be, I am a podcaster, rather than I'm preparing to be a podcaster. That's what I saw in your story.
That's interesting because in coaching, when we do visualization, we try to visualize that we are there. We still need to know where we are, but it's like, I am this person. If you want to
Yeah.
change to this new narrative or new story, you're thinking of, this is who I am now, so I'm going to operate from this new story or this new narrative.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and I love something that you said in your blog. I was reading your blog on narrative. You said your story, your narrative is your bridge between experience and action. So I thought this was very profound. The idea of like, this is a bridge that, here's what I experienced in the past, or maybe here's my experience now, and here's what I want to do next based on that. So say more about that. What do you mean by this sort of like bridge?
Nobody's ever quoted me back to me, so thanks. That was fun. But it's really about in HSD, we realize that people have to live in the real world. And the real world is very complex. And what makes it complex is the fact that we are open systems. We don't live in a little black box. And the things
Mm.
that are happening around us impact who we are in this moment. And it may be a different set of things in 5 minutes from now or tomorrow. And so what serves me today may or may not cope with whatever tomorrow brings. And so I have to build a capacity to adapt along the way. Another thing that shapes the complexity in our lives is diversity. How many different things do we cope with in a day? You can watch TV and in an hour, there are going to be 20 commercials giving you different things you can buy or choose from. You go to the grocery store, you drive down the road, and there are all these different people driving in different ways. Most of them wrong. But we have so much change and diversity in our lives that we have to cope with. And all of these things become interdependent with each other. They're intertwined with each other so that I can't go straight from A to B to C. It's a nonlinear movement. There's no real cause and effect, because every time I say what happened, then I can say, well, what caused that? And what caused that? And what caused that? And so as you think about our experience on a day-to-day basis, if I didn't have that narrative out there to inform my action today, then I might wander aimlessly through
Mm.
a life that didn't get me anywhere. And so having that narrative brings me back from today's experience and helps me point to what is my next wise action to move that direction. People call narratives different things. In the Institute, we have a vision statement that says people everywhere thrive because we all see patterns clearly, we seek to understand, and we act with courage to turn turbulence and uncertainty into possibility for all. And that's a bit of a narrative because it says this is where we want to be in the future. This is people everywhere thrive. But in the meantime, that's what guides Glenda's decisions and my decisions and other HSD associate decisions about how do we move in that direction. So even being on your podcast is a way of saying, okay, I'm sharing these ideas. Maybe more people will hear them and learn how to thrive because they see patterns clearly.
You know, one of the things that helped me connect the pieces was how you were able to bring those pieces together. So starting with who am I as the identity, you know, who do I want to be and who do I aspire to be? So this is something that has to do with the future, visualization. You're creating your story, you're creating your narrative. A metaphor that comes to mind as you're saying this is almost when you upgrade your operating system in the computer. Like, you know, you have an update. And so if you're operating from you know, the older version of the operating system, you know, some apps might not work. So the same thing with your stories, like you're operating if you're operating at an old story or story that you've been telling yourself, but you want to create a different story, a different narrative, there is a gap. You know, you're not able to operate from the old story to become who you want to be in the future. So you call this, because this is going to be an audio, so I want people to visualize, there's this, you know, 3 interconnected circles, and there's one that says identity. And this is where we are talking about, like, the first question is, who am I? You know, if I asked you 20 years ago or 30 years ago, maybe your answer to that question may be different. You said you started as a teacher, and now you have a different story, different narrative. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. And the model that you're talking about, if people went to our website and wanted to see the picture you're talking about, it's called a radical inquiry. And it's a model that I developed a few years ago. And what it does is in those 3 interlocking circles, you do some visualization, some thinking. And in the very center, you say, what would it be if the world were perfect for me? What would be perfect for me? That's your kind of sweet spot, right? And then based in Glenda's work, there are 3 conditions that shape the patterns you have to build. And the first one is about, who do I have to be? How do I hold myself? How do I hold the world? And so your first question is, who am I? If I am living out that sweet spot, who do I have to be in the world? So knowing that the sweet spot for us in the Institute is people everywhere thrive, then who we are people who teach, talk, and act using HSD and Glenda's pattern logic. We look at patterns. We talk about patterns and all that. So that's what you do first, is you think about, here's who I have to be. But a second piece, the circle in the lower left of the 3, is about, so what do I have to focus on? If that's who I am, I'm up there being this person who teaches and consults and coaches about HSD, then what I have to pay attention to is, what is pattern logic? What is HSD about? I look at patterns, and I look at how those patterns behave, and I look at the different models and methods that we use that help us to shape or understand patterns. So that's what that second circle is about. And then the third piece of a narrative is about standing in inquiry. How do I stand in a world and see it and understand it in a way so that I'm not relying on yesterday's pictures to help me understand today's experience? And I'm not relying on just today's experience to help me think about what will move me to this vision that I have, or this narrative that I have for the future, and inform my action. And we talk about inquiry as a way of being, as a way of life. I am okay to say out loud that I'm not there yet, but it is something I aspire to, because we talk about inquiry as having 4 practices. One is that you turn judgment into curiosity. And so when Glenda and I are at the dinner table and I'm ranting and raving about something, in a very gentle voice, she sometimes says to me, so Royce, where's the curiosity in that? Or I will say, okay, I'm stepping out of curiosity right now. I just have to vent. Right? And so having someone there who can help us or help you or help you think about, how do I turn this judgment I'm making into curiosity about what's creating that thing I'm judging? The second practice is about turning disagreement into a shared exploration. Because as long as you're just nose to nose with someone disagreeing, you can't get anywhere with them. But if you can engage them in a way that has you both looking at the same question and listening to each other and not judging each other, then you have a better chance of moving forward. The third one is when I'm feeling defensive, turn defensiveness into self-reflection. Because when I feel defensive, I'm really clear it's all about me and not about the other person. As much as I would like to blame the other person for making me feel defensive, but what is the button that they're pushing? And why is that an important button to me? And then the last one is about turning your assumptions into questions. So when I start looking at a challenge or thinking about a challenge, if I can stop and say, what am I assuming here? And then begin to ask questions about those, then I can shift. So when I'm thinking about my narrative, how do I get curious about things? How do I behave when I bump into people who are different from me or who want a different future than I want? How do I not get defensive or at least understand when I'm defensive? And what are the questions I can ask that will help me move forward? So those three circles, the radical inquiry, help me shape the patterns that I want to see that I have to live out in that future sweet spot. What would be perfect for me?
I love this model. Actually, I'm going to share a link in the notes. So you start with the sweet spot, which is, what you call sweet spot is like, what do I want? And that's usually that can be relevant to an individual or an organization. What do we want as an organization? What do we want as a team? What do I want as a person? You could still use that to apply it at different levels.
Absolutely. I had colleagues who did it with their family, who did the radical inquiry with their family, do it for themselves or them and their partners. We do it with organizations. In fact, I don't do traditional strategic planning anymore. It's just not even viable for me, because if an organization has this radical inquiry, they can build a future as they move toward the patterns they want in the future, rather than think they have to build something today that's going to be exactly the same in 15 years, because it won't. Just won't today.
So this is I mean, it's a good starting point. I know when I look at the model, it's very clear. There is simplicity, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to come up with these answers, because they really requires a lot of reflection and iterations and working through these moving parts. So you may find like, what you want is not aligned with what's important, is not aligned with who you want to be and all that stuff. So it requires some sort of several drafts to get to the point where you say, okay, yeah, this is it. This all aligned now. Everything makes sense to me.
And you get to a point where you say, this is it for now.
This is it for now.
Because the world is going to change. You're going to keep learning more, and you need to go back and revisit it periodically to say, does this still fit? Does this still fit?
Like you said, you stand in inquiry again, like you're curious about, this is a snapshot of the story I want to create. And then maybe a year from now, a couple of years from now, the story may change.
Exactly.
So I like that line, like, this is it for now. The idea of the sweet spot as a starting point. What do I want, or what do we want as a team or as an organization or as a family? It presupposes that the person or the group know what they want. And I'm sure you've run into many organizations or people that you work with and coach who may not know what they want.
Right.
So now what? How do you work through that?
I could tell them what I think they should want, but that never works. So generally what I do is I talk about, what are you interested in? What's important to you? When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Who's somebody you admire a great deal and would like your life to be like theirs, right? So I have the person reflect on different scenarios of what could be possible or what's important. And then the really important part about this way of doing narrative is, as you said, it has to be simple. And so if somebody has given me this long story about this person did this and then this and then this, I ask them to stop and boil it down. What's the essence of your story? Because if you have this long running story for a narrative, then what you end up with is a really scattered pattern, doing this and this and this, because it's not focused. And so when I asked you early on about what are 3 ways people describe you, that got rid of all the he said, she said, and the drama and all that. It's these 3 things. And so it's really important that centerpiece be really tight. 2, 3, maybe 4 ideas, and it has to be something you can remember, because you're going to be using this to guide your action over time. And if you have a long story, now which part of the story was this? Right, you're going to end up not being able to hang on to that essential piece of what goes in the middle.
I can see that because I mentioned I'm a writer. But then when I think about like, what's most important, like what am I focusing on? I'm not really focusing on writing as much. So now I see like there's a misalignment between what I want or who I want to be.
Well, and
And
that
like when
gives you a choice, doesn't it? Do you still want to be a writer? Then what are you going to
I
do to
do.
move there?
Yeah.
Or if it's really not where you are right now, then what are you going to put in its place?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can come back in a couple of years and go, oh, writing, I'm there again. That's what I
Yeah.
really want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this idea, I can't remember the term we used. It's about like the pairs, the interdependent pairs.
Interdependent pairs.
That's another very insightful way to look at things, like the trade-offs. Like if you're not like, okay, this is who you want to be, and this is not what's happening today. There's a choice, and now you have a awareness to make a choice. You maybe increase some of that a little bit, or maybe you find ways to become more of who you want to be as a writer, or limit some of the things that taking up your time so you're not writing. So it's very interesting. So I would like you to say more about this idea, the interdependent pairs.
So the example I used when you were in the course, that's funny, I'd forgotten about that, was about writing, because as I get older, I have more to say and I want more ways to say it. So that's something that I want to incorporate more into my life. And when I think about why I don't write more, then I realize that there are lots of things pulling on me. There's not just one reason that I'm writing or not writing. It is, am I writing for work, or is this something I'm writing just for me? So I'm a poet. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I decided I would write a haiku every single day for 100 days. And that was me. And so I would set aside time for my writing in the midst of all the work writing we were doing. But I had that time. I did it every single day. I got to 100 days and I wasn't through. So I did it for a year. And so now I have 4 books, one for each season, of haiku, right? So it's saying, how do I manage these two things that are very different and still get something out of both? So I would have a set time in the day when I could move toward the haiku. I had set times in the day when I did the professional writing, but I always was looking at the world outside my window to say, is that an image I could turn into a haiku, right? So I was sliding back and forth between the two. Another pair of challenges there about writing was about time, how I manage my time. I have all the time in the world, or I don't have time to write. I don't make time to write, or I do make time to write. And neither one of those is naughty or nice. It's just these are the factors that happen in my life. There was another one that was about, am I doing growth writing, or am I writing about history, future or back, history focused? And how do I balance that? Because I love narratives that take us into the future and very imaginative, but I also love memoirs. And so the question was, what? Sometimes I do one, sometimes I do the other, and I bounce back and forth. And because life is so complex, I can't ever focus just on one of those interdependent pairs. And I know that if I shift when I write, it may shift what I can write about. And when I write about it, it may shift, am I writing about history or future focus? So all of those pairs are interdependent with each other and not just one or the other. It's similar to Barry Johnson's work on polarities, but it's different in that basically he talks about one polarity at a time, and you work on I don't remember the shadow side, and then I can't remember for sure the terms that won't come to me right now. But we think about, because all of those forces are there, all of those comparisons are there, you have to think about them all at once. But you don't have to pick every one of them in your life. Pick the 3 or 4 that are most present for you at any given time. So you could name, what are the forces that act on you as an agile coach? How many could you name? Probably a billion.
Yeah.
To think about just the ones that are most important.
I like this way of thinking gives us, as far as like, it's not like if I'm not writing, then I'm not a writer. I can make some trade-offs, or maybe there are a lot of factors that I see that are contributing to this. So maybe I will try to find how to The image that came to my mind, I don't know if that's the right analogy here, but like a seesaw, like things are heaped like up and down, and you try to like, sometimes this goes up, sometimes this goes down, and then you try to balance as at some point.
The image I have is, those old soundboards where you would push the buttons up and down to balance the bass and the higher tones. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like that, moving from one, and sometimes you're caught in the middle.
I want to go over the different circles again, and then I want to ask you about something, based on your experience. Like, where do you see people get stuck the most? And I know it's probably depends on the group or the person that you're working with, but where do you notice that we talked about the sweet spot? Like, what do I want? So that's where the starting point, and then identity is who am I, who I want to be, maybe like a writer, for example. And then focus is around what's important. We haven't touched on the last one, which is how do I connect? But where do you find it most challenging with these different areas as you navigate or help guide a person or an organization or a group work through it?
That's a really interesting question. And I think that because we want things to settle into one pattern and stay there, people have a hard time thinking about these in more adaptable or flexible ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's the intersection of all three circles. So if this is who I need to be to get to my sweet spot, and these are the things that are important, then what I need to do is just tell people what I need, right? I need to be clear about that. I need to be, and not change it. It needs to be static. And so the exchanges become old and not so useful anymore. Or I might say, I have to focus on these and nothing else. And I get stuck there. Or I might name one set of things that I think is really important to me right now. But over time, I realize that that's not something I want. But I think I can't change it. Or I can't ever be anything except this one identity. When the truth is, our identity is multifaceted. And so I am this, and whether I'm being a mother or being a friend or being a sister or a person in my community, that's going to look different, right? And yet I often see people getting stuck saying they can't be this in any other way. So if you get too locked in on any of the circles, you can get stuck. The other thing is it can become so broad that you don't have a focus and you get stuck going in circles and circles and circles and circles. And so any of those circles people can get stuck on either by not being focused enough or by being too constrained, too focused. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what clarified it for me also is like the other frame of the what, the so what, now what. I remember mentioned something about like, people can spend a lot of time figuring out the what. What do I want? Who am I? And then they go in circles around like those things. And then they're not really moving to the next thing, which is, okay, so what? And then now what? Basically action, right? So I tend to make this assertion based on just the experience from working with different teams and groups is sometimes that's where people get stuck the most is like the what and a little bit of a so what, and then the now what it gets hard to get them to that, to move to the then now what. Okay, we know all this information, or we're spending a lot of time doing this information. Let's take a step, take an action. Because basically if we are honoring the value of standing in inquiry and this is it for now, if we apply that thinking, then we can come back and edit it. If the now what we didn't like the now
Absolutely.
what, we can come back to it and edit it and make it better.
Yeah, and what you're describing is our adaptive action cycle. And you hear a lot of people, there are different places where they've come up with these cycles of change or decision making. And this one's very simple. 3 questions. What's going on? What sense can I make of it? So what sense can I make of it? Now what am I going to do? Which then kicks you back into your next what, because it's an iterative cycle. What do I learn in this cycle that informs me in the next cycle and the next? And you're right, people can get stuck in any one of those. I got to get more data, more data, more data. That's more whatting. When because the world changes every single day, you're at some point you have to draw the line and say this is enough for now. It's good enough data to do my next wise action. And then they get into the so what, and they go, well, it could mean this, or it could mean this, or I could make meaning this way, or it could, what if I did this, or what if I did this? And we have some tools in HSD that we use in that so whating stage. This interdependent pairs is an example. But what you have to do is you don't need to understand it to the end of time, because you're just moving to your next step. So it can be good enough to get you to a next step, and then you take that action. Glenda and I grew up with an interesting mother. She was a teacher, and she was strong and powerful in a time when, in the 60s, when women often didn't work and weren't expected to be strong and powerful often. And she would say, just, we'd get into this, I don't know if I want these shoes. As kids, you just can't make a decision. And she would say, look at us, and she'd say, do something, even if it's wrong. Because if it's wrong, you can fix it, right? And so that's what I think of sometimes is take an action, because in that action, you're going to watch for what it does to the patterns around you. And if you're not getting what you want, do something different. Say, okay, what do I not want about this? So what does that mean? Now, what can I do to shift it again? And that cycle can be in a heartbeat. Or it can take a week, or it can take 2 or 3 years, and you have pieces and bits that come and go. But these iterative cycles, seeing, observing, understanding, and taking action, are the only way you can move from today's behavior toward the narrative that describes, because it's your narrative that informs your so what state. Here's what's going on here. So what is it I want out there, and what are the differences, and how do I move to my next step toward that thing I want? So I'm glad you brought up adaptive action.
It's very simple and powerful way to look at this cycle of change. Here's the what, here's the so what, and here's the now what. And if we have more time, I would love to talk about maybe balancing them. But I wanna go to that last piece of the radical inquiry, because we didn't talk about it as much. So we talked about the sweet spot. What do I want? We talked about the identity, or who am I? And we talked about the focus. What's important? If I want to be a writer, then it's important that I start to write. You give yourself a target, one haiku a day for 100 days. I'm going to try focus on that. And then now the last piece is, how do I connect, or you refer to it as connections. Say more about that. What is that? How does that fit into all of this?
Well, in its most basic sense, that's where the inquiry lives, that I interact with people in my world in inquiry. And whether I want to be a writer or a connector or a race car driver, I connect with people who can help me move that direction, who give me feedback, who support me, or who are also interested in riding or driving race cars, so that I'm building my world all the time toward that thing I want. So I can connect with people who are like me, who are different from me, people who will challenge me. In our work in the Institute, we connect with people through adaptive action labs, like you came to about narrative. We do those every month. Sometimes they're about, the one starts in a couple of weeks, is about using HSD in consulting. The next one is about resilience. The next one is about DE&I. So we teach and we consult and we write books and we do podcasts. so you think about, how can I connect to others in a way, and to the world in general in ways that help me move to that sweet spot. And in those connections, I focus on what's important to be that person I need to be. So the circles themselves are totally interdependent, enmeshed with each other. And you're always thinking about how you build one with the other. Yeah. And in coaching, helping people identify those and on an ongoing basis and using them to inform their adaptive actions is basically how I coach.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially like this, the what do I want is where the conversation, starts. Because, again, if you're coaching someone or a team in an organization and there's no clarity on what they want, it's like, trying to get in your car and you're trying to put your destination, and you don't know that you don't have the destination. So it's, you're not gonna go anywhere. You're just gonna sit in your car. So it's really finding out, where do I want to go? What do I want? And then from there, you can build this inquiry around the other questions and try to bring it all together. And that creates your story and your narrative.
And it's all about helping that person find it for themselves. asking the questions, asking them to think about stories, asking them. And then once they've told me some stories, I listen for the patterns in their stories. And I say, well, this sounds important to you. Does that work? No, that's not quite it. And so reflecting back what I hear them saying helps me be able to help them figure out how to refine where they're going.
That's very important because sometimes people don't hear themselves as they say things.
Yeah.
And having someone who can reflect back or repeat what they say and they hear it again, then that might spark something. The other thing, they could write the stories, as you said, like if they write things and they think of them as like their first draft, and then they can just edit. That might also give them some insights into what they want, and maybe then they can build this.
People who are journalers generally have an easier time at this than people who don't journal, because they're not used to focusing or pursuing a thought or pursuing the essence of what something means as they write it. But yeah, getting people to write, getting people to think about, even drawing pictures can be helpful to people sometimes.
So using a lot of different channels to bring that,
Absolutely.
story and the narrative. So what's something you would like to point or leave us with from this conversation, like the create your story, create your narrative?
It's a really great question. I think one of the things that sometimes when I talk about narrative, people assume I'm talking about a written story. And as we were just talking about it, people can put their narratives into pictures. They can put their narrative into a collage. They can put their narrative into a poem. They can draw it on a mural board. They can use bulleted statements, right? So there's not a right way to do this. How you do it is what you need. And so that's what makes it right or not. Is it fit for you? And the questions that you think through, those 4 questions: what's my sweet spot? Who am I? What's important? And how do I connect? Those questions can be even stated in different ways based on what makes sense to you. It's the essence of what it is that matters. And so if you go to the website and read the Radical Inquiry Model, or I have a book about Radical Inquiry, it's called Simple Rules, a Radical Inquiry into Self. It's just a suggestion, because in this world, if it doesn't fit for you, you're not going to do it. And the other thing I always tell people is you can't do somebody else's. So it might be that I watch you, I observe you over time, and I think, oh my gosh, you got to do this. It's just the right thing for you. Well, that's not my wish. That's my wish for you. It's not your wish for yourself. And so I can't, as a coach, as a friend, as a mother, as a sister, I can't impose myself on somebody else's radical inquiry. I can only do my own. So I guess those are the 2 things. There's no set form, and I have to do my own.
That's a great way to wrap up. I think this is really creating a story is not easy, but getting this pieces together and standing in inquiry and finding out what do I want can be a good starting point for people to build their own story. That's great. So where do people find? I know you mentioned the blog. Any I can put the links in the notes, but any other resources you would like to point to, or any upcoming events?
Well, our website at hsdinstitute.org has a ton of stuff, and anything that you would want is there. We do have some stuff on Amazon. Our books are all up for sale on Amazon. But the resources, everything on the website is free and it's open source. So if you use it, we ask 2 things. 1, use it and cite the source, because if people want to know more, we want to know where to go. And the second thing is, if you use it and learn something, teach it to somebody else. Yeah. That's it. Two requirements. So.
No, I love that. I appreciate that you and Glenda kept this open source, or people can use it and refer to the source, and just this will help spread these tools which are very relevant to complexity and the complex world that we live in. So any final thoughts?
There is one other thing I want to say that I forgot to say, is that coaches have tons of tools that they use with their people. And they can use HSD tools, or they can use other tools, because even if you've never thought about patterns, the tools that we use as coaches are created to help people shift patterns. And so if you're using the radical inquiry as a framework, don't think you only have to use HSD tools to help people move through it, because HSD isn't to take the place of other people's tools, other sources' tools. It is to enhance and help people understand those tools better.
Yeah.
So I just want to be sure I said that, because I'm not trying to advocate for, everything else to go in the garbage and just use HSD. Of course, I'd like that, but I'm not advocating for that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of tools, and sometimes we get lost in them, and it's always good to have something that is simple, that but and clear, and yet it's very powerful when it all comes together. So thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm glad you were able to be with me today.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Honored that you would ask, and I had a good time. So it's a win. I hope you got what you needed.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity, then repeat.